So we've talked a little bit about the scientific revolution and the undercutting of the power of the church and the changes that brought about. And we've also talked a little bit about the Enlightenment. Well, the period of time of the Enlightenment probably ends probably in the late 1700s. The Enlightenment starts in the early 1600s and goes up into the late 1700s. And starting, let's say, around 1775 or so, there's a lot of discussion about what the actual date is on some of this stuff. But starting around then, we start having what we call the modern period. And the modern period is a period that runs until about 1950. And during this modern period, we have something called modern art. And modern art really is the art that was produced during this modern period. But the modern period is also a philosophical thing that happened, and that philosophy was based on the material conditions of the time, which was based in the Industrial Revolution and the use of colonies for resources, labor, and markets. And one of the main things about one of the main ideas about the during this modern period, we look at the kinds of exploration that was going on. A number of ideas came out during this period of time, and probably one of those that certainly controversial is the idea of evolution. Charles Darwin wrote his book while he's traveling around. The book Origin of the Species uh, gives the basic fundamental ideas of evolution. Those ideas came about during the modern times. Also, during the modern times, we had the creation of three or four different kinds of disciplines, academic disciplines, sociology, and anthropology and economics, as actual philosophical. I'm not philosophical, academic disciplines. And so the first anthropologist was a guy by the name of Morgan. He traveled around, looked at primitive people, so-called primitive people. And the first sociologists was a guy by the name of Karl Marx and his partner, and I can't remember his partner's name right off the top of my head right now, but Engels, Friedrich Engels. So Engels and Marx were the first sociologists, and Morgan was the first anthropologist. And there was a lot of things happening during this time. The Industrial Revolution was, uh, you know, changing the way that goods are produced and marketed. We suddenly had a global economy, and so we had these modern times. Also, another academic discipline that was developed during this time was also psychology, and with Freud leading the way at the turn of the century. We also have Marx, in particular, analyzing the relationship between labor, meaning the people who can only live by selling their labor power, and capital, meaning those people who own the means of production or the equipment and the resources, and who technically don't have to work. And what's the relationship between these people? And so this is a time of a tremendous amount of change in terms of ideas, a lot of, quote, progress, a lot of development. Electricity was harnessed during this time. Telephone was created. Uh, Trains were built. Huge ocean liners were created. And then we had, starting in the 1917, we have World War One. Then in 1939, we have World War II, which ends with the dropping of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And so these modern times is very, very specific period in the development of Western technology, history, philosophy, academic disciplines. During this time, we also have a lot of different art movements that occur and this is one of the things that is kind of classic about the modern period is there's a different art movement seems like every 10 to 15 years. And there's different ideas of what art is. And all of this comes out of this modern time where it just seems like human, at least Western creativity and growth and progress at that time seemed unbounded. There was just, that was when everybody was very, very uplifted and positive, especially right around the turn of the um, 19th to the 20th century. People were very, very positive about their future. At least what we get that feeling from the books that are written, but that only represents the moneyed class, what Marx would call the bourgeoisie. The working class were still very much suffering, and the people in the colonies were very much suffering. And so this whole idea of modernism kind of came crashing to an end. And during the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of looking back on, Western philosophers were looking back, having been under the assumption, because of all of the material progress that took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, look at all this development of things such as electricity and means of communication and transportation and all that. That was supposed to be the height of Western civilization. And that height of Western civilization ended with 2 world wars and the atomic bomb and the creation of Hitler and his view for the world. And Western philosophers began to have doubt about, well, are we really the highest and best example or expression of the human spirit? And so with that doubt also came this decolonization movement, where countries are saying we no longer are going to be under the control of France, England, Belgium, Spain, Italy, Germany. We're going to set out on our own, and we're going to govern ourselves the way that we see fit. And this also coincides with the civil rights movement in the United States, a tremendous amount of interest in Eastern religions as a counterpoint to Christianity, development of the hippies and the whole craziness of the 1960s. All of this is the beginnings of the postmodern period, starting in about 1950, maybe 1945, 1950. And so with this postmodern period is really questioning of what we call the master narrative, meaning that description of the human spirit as exemplified by Western civilization from the time of Hammurabi up to the present. And when spoken through the eyes of the West, it looks like a grand, glorious project and endeavor. But that's not the only eyes to look at it through. And as the Western philosophers began to express their doubt about whether their civilization was the highest form of civilization, then there was a lot of room for other people to come in and raise different kinds of issues, and different kinds of ideas were able to get traction. And so this postmodern time actually represents a particular period in the history of Western civilization where suddenly the West is not only looking at itself, but it's beginning to take cues and ideas and concepts from other cultures and incorporate it into their worldview.